Welcome back, class. Now that we've gone through the first problem a little more slowly, in more detail, we can move through the rest of the problems a little bit quicker. So starting off with number 2, the question asks, everything else being equal under variable costing, which one of these will be true? And we know that the answer here is C. The net operating income will tend to vary directly with changes in sales. And the intuition for this is that when we're using our variable costing, the fixed overhead is a period cost that's not included in the cost of your actual product. So basically, the variable costs here are going to vary directly with the number of units produced, and in turn, the net operating income will also tend to vary directly with your changes in sales. Moving on to number 3, we're told that New Deal Company produces a single product. We're told the level of operating income using absorption costing is 92,000. I've noted that down here. We're also told that using variable costing, the operating income is 98,600. And if we remember back to the chapter and the chapter notes, we had some comparisons between production and sales. So we know that if the absorption income is less than the variable costing, then that means that our production is less than our sales. So this particular problem tells us the production of 18,000 units, and we know then based on this comparison here that our sales are on the greater than side of the equation. So our sales are going to be greater than those 18,000 units. Moving on to number 4. Which of the following is true of a company that uses absorption cost? And just going through a few of the answers. A, the costs assigned to units in inventory are typically lower under absorption costing. We know that this is false because the absorption costing is always going to be greater than the variable costing. Moving down, can move on to to letter C. The unit product cost can change as a result of changes in the number of units manufactured, and we do know this to be true under the absorption costing. So moving on to number 6, which of the following costs are inventoried when we use variable costing? So if we think back to problem 1, we're using our variable costing. That's the second set of calculations that we made. So if we move back up here, we see that using that second calculation, we're just considering that $250. And that's just the variable costs here. So direct materials, direct labor, and variable overhead. So moving back down to number 6, those items that we're talking about are the direct manufacturing costs. Moving on to questions 7 and 8. This information here for Plainview Company applies to both of these problems. First off, we are asked, what is the inventoriable cost per unit using variable costing? And we know in this case that we're just considering the direct manufacturing costs, direct materials, direct manufacturing labor, and then also the variable manufacturing costs here. So we can calculate out a variable cost per unit, just adding these up. 30 plus 2 plus 3, and that's going to give us B, $35. Since it is variable costing, we're not considering any of the fixed cost in our inventoriable or product cost here. Then if we look at number 8, absorption costing, this is when we will use all manufacturing costs, not just the variable. So we could take our calculation from above, the $35, and just add in the fixed manufacturing costs. So if we go back up here, we can see that the fixed manufacturing costs are $25 per unit. So adding that to the 35 gives us a total of $60 in this case. Again, you can see the contrast here. Variable costing, $35, absorption costing, $60. And thinking back to the conceptual question above, absorption costing is always going to be greater than your variable costing. Moving on to the next set of questions, question 9 and 10, we're going to consider the following information. First off, we are asked if the company uses absorption costing, what would your operating income be? So thinking about the operating income equation from before, we know that we take our sales minus cost of goods sold, and that's going to give us our gross margin here. And then we subtract out the selling and administrative expenses as well to arrive at our operating income. So in this case, sales is going to be your price times the number of units. And we're told both of these particular pieces of information in the problem, $40 per unit, 2,250 units are sold. So that gives us our sales of 90,000. And you can see that number 1 right here in the solution. The cost of goods sold is going to be the number of units, again that same number of units from above, times the absorption rate per unit. And up here you can see I've calculated out the absorption rate per unit. Just taking the variable costs, adding them up, arrive at $29 per unit. And the last item here, the variable selling and admin, we're told that the costs on this one are $1 per unit. We know the number of units, so we can make that calculation as well. And then we have some fixed selling and admin costs as well, $6,000 here. And you can see once you have all these particular items lined up, you just take the sales minus the cost of goods sold to arrive at your gross margin here in the middle, and then subtract out your selling and admin expenses to arrive at the operating income. We're next asked how the operating income would be different if we're using the variable costing. So in this particular case, we're going to multiply or to add up the contribution margin per unit, and that's just going to be the price minus the variable costs. You can see that we arrive at $20 per unit. Multiply that by your number of units here. And then we can take our contribution margin minus the fixed expenses of 30,000 and 6,000. And we arrive at the operating income of 9,000. Taking a look at the last question here, it's a conceptual question. Which of the following is the cost of not having sufficient inventory? And if we think back to the chapter The ordering costs are the costs of placing and receiving an order. So that's not really relevant to sufficient inventory. Carrying costs are the costs of keeping and storing the actual inventory. So again, that does not have to do with having or not having sufficient inventory. By definition, stockout costs is the cost of not having sufficient inventory. So that's our answer there. And just to go through and eliminate the last item on the list, D, just-in-time costs are costs associated with the JIT system, and that's when goods are pulled through a system on demand. So that concludes the in-class exercises for Chapter 8. Any questions about these, feel free to bring to class.